Welcome to Season 4 of Everything is Learning. This season, we're celebrating neurodivergent people, their stories, strengths, challenges, and the powerful ways they learn and live. Because honoring every individual's brain and lived experience makes the world a better place for everybody. We're excited you're here. Let's dive in.
Hello! This season, we're featuring guests who are opening up space for honest, nuanced conversations about neurodiversity, identity, lived experience, and the things that make us who we are. Today's guest, Carolyn Keel, is doing exactly that, one story at a time. Carolyn is the creator and host of Beyond 6 Seconds, an award-winning podcast dedicated to going beyond the quick first impressions we form and into the layered, powerful stories of neurodivergent people from around the world. Through her thoughtful interviews, she explores how neurodivergence intersects with culture, identity, and lived experience, amplifying voices and challenging assumptions. By day, Carolyn is an Instructional Design Senior Manager, creating accessible training for a global workforce. Amazing, thank you. In both her corporate work and her podcasting, she's committed to accessibility, clarity, and giving people the time and space to be heard. Wish everyone would approach it that way. Diagnosed as autistic later in life, Carolyn draws on her own journey, marked by academic excellence, deep focus on passions, and the challenges of coordination, group work, and sensory overwhelm, to connect with her guests on a deeper level. A self-taught podcaster, she blended her background in music, technology, and learning design into a show that's both inviting and impactful, evolving over the years to shine a bright light on the richness of neurodiverse experiences. Please help us welcome Carolyn Keel. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Congratulations on your award.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be on the show. Thanks for having me.
We're so happy that you're here. We love your show. We'll make sure to share it with our listeners and viewers. And we've learned so much, and we continue to learn so much. And all that you're doing is it's so inspiring and it's so impactful, and it's broadening points of view where we thought we knew something and then we realized we don't have a clue. So the name of your show also is so poignant, Beyond 6 Seconds. Mm-hmm. And it's we're inspired. So we are so glad to have you here today.
Right. Thank you.
So I'm going to start off. Oh, go ahead, Marcy.
I was just going to say, I also like that you took it a step further, and not only did you own the Beyond 6 Seconds, but that for so many of your guests, you featured how they have experienced that 6-second first impression. I thought that was so powerful, because it's one thing for you to say it, and I know you were well credentialed and all of that, but when you piece together how it's impacted each person individually, mm-hmm. and you seem so common themes and all of that, it was really illuminating. Like, it helped me check my implicit bias. And having children, potentially, for sure a child, but children that are neurodiverse, it makes me grateful there are people like you and the people you talk to, because it's making the world more inclusive and accessible for the ones that I love and care about and can't do it on my own. So glad to find people like you.
Thank you.
Please go into the
I appreciate that. Thank you.
So the icebreaker question that Marissa and I wanted to ask you was, do you remember the first podcast you ever listened to, or one that inspired you to start your own?
I do. And this was the one that eventually inspired me to start my own podcast. I believe it was back in 2016. So before I was podcasting, I was part of an a cappella singing group in New York City. So that was my creative outlet for years and years. And I was at rehearsal one day, and one of my singing colleagues brought in this podcast and recommended that we listen to it, because at the time we were singing Hallelujah by Leonard Cohen, and the podcast was Revisionist History by Malcolm Gladwell, and he had an episode in one of his early seasons about Leonard Cohen and the evolution of the song Hallelujah. So she's like, oh, that's so interesting, you should listen. It's we're singing the song, and I just happened on this podcast, and she sent it out for everyone to listen to. And so I listened to that episode, and it was interesting. I loved the narrative style. And that got me listening to more episodes of Revisionist History. And that's really where I discovered podcasting. And it probably was another year or so after that when I had some career changes going on at the time. I wound up not singing with the group as often, and I really wanted a creative outlet. And I'm like, now there's this thing called podcasting. I know a little bit about audio recording and microphones and a little bit of web stuff from my singing days. So maybe I could do this. Maybe I could try and just get a microphone and try it out. So I started early 2018, and the rest is history, as they say.
That's awesome.
Wow. That's incredible. I love that you call podcasting a creative outlet, because I haven't heard a lot of people say that, but Marissa and I talk about that all the time, that this is really like, we both work full time. We both take care of our kids. We both do all of these things. And our mom in particular, who is like the ultimate feminist, has told Marissa and I, like, this is the one thing that you guys really get to do for you.
Yeah.
And it's stimulating, it's creative, it's amazing. So I love that you said that. That's so cool.
Great. Thank you.
And I love that you took something that was totally separate from work or your identity, like that piece of your identity, and changed it into something, and that you did it. It survived the pandemic, because lots of things didn't.
Yeah.
So
That's true.
Major props on that. I mean, maybe even that helped cope with some of the pandemic, isolation and all of that.
It did. It was an evolution, because when I started in 2018, I didn't know I was autistic yet, and it wasn't focused on neurodiversity. It was it was just a general interview show where I would talk to people who were doing interesting things to me, just to get used to the concept. And really, it was during the pandemic and just talking to so many different people with different stories and experiences, talking to people. I talked to some people who had disabilities, and then I wound up on like actually autistic Instagram, and just learning more about people's real life experiences just taught me so much about what autism really was and really could feel like for people who are autistic. And that helped lead me on the journey to realizing that I'm autistic too. So after that, I changed the focus in early 2022. So it was definitely an evolution that was at least somewhat related to the pandemic, but it's been an interesting journey.
I just want to make sure I understood. So 2022 is when you got your diagnosis?
Late 2021. So yeah, 2022 was when I started shifting the show to focus on neurodivergence.
Okay. And what has having that diagnosis done or changed for you?
For me, it's even though it's happened now a few years ago, I still have a lot of, processing and just different ways of approaching life. But a lot of times when you get a diagnosis later in life, you kind of look back at your past and reinterpret it through it, or just have a different lens on it and say like, oh, all those times that I was like struggling with sensory sensitivities or struggling with coordination or other things, wasn't like some moral failing or something, quote unquote, wrong with me. It was just sort of natural variation that is likely related to my autism. So it kind of helped me look back with a little more kindness on that, and realizing that, now I really don't have to suffer through things. There are accommodations and things that I can make for myself. So we can certainly talk more about that, because I know I talked a little earlier about some sensory challenges that I had and coordination, and sort of how it took many years, but I found my way to kind of manage through, or sometimes just avoid situations completely. But that's okay. That's part of the learning process. It seems silly to say like, oh, I'm an adult if I don't have to do this optional activity, but sometimes it takes a while to get there in the thought process.
Well,
Yeah.
and like coping, right?
Mhm.
Like how that looks for you. And I appreciate the ability to self-advocate and like choose not to do something.
Mhm.
That is really transformative. And I know I told Elena I was so excited to be talking about this topic, because the first podcast I listened to related to anything autism or neurodivergence happened to include a very harrowing statistic, which was that people on the autism spectrum are 160% more likely to drown, related to the sensory sensitivity stuff. And they're also 4 times to 6 times more likely to be assaulted. That doesn't necessarily mean essayed. It could be just assaulted. But because they learn that they don't always have autonomy over their bodies. And it is something that I try and balance, the fact that there are things that my children would totally elect not to do, like brushing their teeth, but are really critical and educational as a parent. And then there are things like hugging, giving a kiss, that I will always allow to be optional.
Yeah. And I'm a member of Generation X, and that was, refusing to hug or kiss a relative was not a thing. Like, fortunately, it was not something that was forced on me, but having that realization that, like, oh, like, younger people and their parents are realizing, like, no, you don't have to show affection to people if for whatever reason that you don't want to, you're not into it, or, anything. That's really groundbreaking. So that whole concept of, even if you are like a small child, you have a right to boundaries and preferences and keeping yourself safe. So yeah, totally.
Yeah. I think the other interesting piece to that too is it's also like eye contact, I feel like, is one too. That has been outrageous. People are like, if you don't make eye contact, it's rude. And just to like hear that out loud sounds so ridiculous in my mind, in the sense it's like, okay, this is rude. Not hugging your grandparent is rude. Not doing this, not doing that. When you say it out loud, it's just like the lack of people just allowing their bodies to be themselves and allowing their, we talk a lot about how health is all encompassing. It's mind, body, spirit. It's everything. And I think that piece too is like, you're kind of talking about boundaries. Can you imagine what it would be like if the generations before us learned what boundaries were when they were children? And what that would do for neurodivergent people. And I'm so happy that there are podcasts out there like yours where people are saying these things, and you are propelling that message forward to say, these things that people told us in the past, we're getting rid of that. Like that, those societal norms are being set on fire and we're never going back.
They're abnorms.
Right.
Yeah, I know I've had a lot of assumptions and biases challenged just through the conversations I've had with my guests. So it's every episode is I'm learning something new, and that's one of the reasons I love it so much.
Same. Yep.
Given what you just said, by day you're an instructional designer in a global workforce, and then I don't know if it's by afternoon, night, but you do a podcast. But how does your neurodivergent lens influence the way you approach accessible training?
So yeah, I mean, in terms of the training I do it on a lot of different topics. The topics aren't specific to accessibility, but accessibility is always part of the training that we create or that I design or develop. One, because, there are obviously legal obligations, but two, it's also the right thing to do, and it makes a much more effective training. So sort of building that in early on is really important. So you're not trying to like fix it up at the end, because that usually doesn't work very well. But it could be, it's anything from the most basic things you might think of, like, alt text for images for screen readers that may, only be reading the text on the screen, or, image descriptions, or just, more interactive types of training whenever possible. So what I like to do, and again, it's not possible or really feasible for every single training, but sometimes if there's a lot of text to be read, I may have a voiceover that helps read it, because sometimes it helps people focus a little bit more. But even in the design, there's such a temptation when you have a lot of content to just make like walls and walls of text. And I'm sure we've all sat through trainings or presentations where it's just slides with like so much text, and it's overwhelming for really almost anyone, and certainly a lot of neurodivergent people too. So just trying to simplify your messages and get people engaged and use their own knowledge about what they already know about the topics, because that's the thing with adult learning. People come into the workforce, they have their own experiences and knowledge that they bring to it. So they don't necessarily want to be lectured, because they know like they already know a lot. So a lot of times you're bringing in and help to leverage some of the past knowledge that they've had. So, and the thing about neurodivergence is that people have different needs. Like, just as an example, like I really focus best when it's complete quiet around me, like for the most part. Other people cannot focus if it's complete quiet. They need some sort of music. They need some sort of talking or some sort of something in the background. So those are two competing needs. So in that case, we try for flexibility, and it could just be something simple as, if you're taking a training and, have a supervisor give someone the ability to listen to music in their earbuds if they're taking a training, if that helps them focus more, or find a quiet area for them to take training. It's things like that are, you can't just design one training and have it be like perfect for everyone, but having that flexibility makes it more accessible in general to wider populations.
That's awesome.
I think that's brilliant. Yeah.
Me too. And I love that you said that it wasn't, the training is not about accessibility. You infuse accessibility in the training. So it probably goes unnoticed and then becomes kind of like second nature. Oh, I saw Carolyn did this. This is something that I thought was awesome. This stood out to me. I'm going to incorporate that in my own. And because you didn't make it a big deal or spell it out as accessible, it just is like a thing. It just becomes normal or expected per se.
Yeah. Especially if you do it during the design phase, because you don't want to be at the end, you've created everything. I'm like, oh no, I forgot. Like, I should make this accessible. Let me go back and rework it. It's much more organic when you're keeping accessibility in mind as you're building.
Yeah. One of the suggestions that you had said before that I thought was really, really helpful was having headphones. We had talked like a while ago about that. And I just thought that was, because I'm one of those people too, who has to have like quiet, and I do a lot better. I don't wear headphones like during conferences or whatever, but the thought of somebody having, like, when I was teaching in the classroom, we had the hat system. So someone who would, one of my students would have like an earpiece in, and I would have a microphone, and they would hear directly for me or through the system. And to hear that directly, I would have focused so much more had I had that in school. And just the idea of being able to do that, and even just offer that one simple thing. Hey, there's headphones here. I'm wearing a mic. Like, it's a room of 300 people. People who like the background noise are going to get it without the headphones. People who want the headphones, they have them. Just that alone, I feel like, would make such a difference, especially in larger conferences when people get lost. And you talked about being interactive. And I think, just that piece alone too. I think a lot of times people go into giving speeches or going to a conference or something, and they don't think about the audience. They think about the content. So part of you talking about accessibility is thinking more about the audience first, I think, too. Is that accurate?
I think that's a big part of it too. I was just thinking about the conferences that I've been to, and I'm sure I don't know if you've experienced this, but at the end, if there's a Q&A and there are people running mics and passing it around, how there's always people who think like, I don't need the mic. I can shout. Like, people get like, no, people cannot hear you. People virtually cannot hear anything you're saying. And then also people with, like hearing disabilities may or may not be able to hear what you or like auditory processing disabilities may not be able to hear you. So it's like, no, just wait for the mic. Like, it's here. And then like everyone will be able to hear, or almost everyone. So yeah.
Right. I love that. I think that's so helpful too. Another thing that I saw at a conference was captions. So like somebody was there and doing captions. Marissa and I went to the Rochester Institute of Technology, which has a particular program for deaf and hard of hearing. It's called NTID. And everywhere pretty much we went, there were interpreters. And I think that there should be interpreters just offered anyway. I think that it's fascinating to watch. I think captions are so helpful and improves reading fluency. Like, there's so much to be added just with captions too. But I think that I could go down this rabbit hole for forever. I think that it's so needed.
Yep. Yeah. Captions are another thing that like so many people use now, whether or not they are, deaf or hard of hearing. Like I know I use it. It's just, sometimes it just eases up the cognitive load to watch things with captions, or maybe I'm in an environment where I can't play the sound, or like the speakers don't work, and it's helpful. It helps everyone.
Carolyn, you said something brilliant that Marissa and I have heard a lot recently, which is that when you make things accessible, it helps everyone.
Oh, yes.
Did you catch that? Yeah. So one of the things that we talked about recently was we had seen a video of somebody who was in a wheelchair who was talking about, didn't even know this, that at the edge of your sidewalks where there's like a divot, it was actually made for people with wheelchairs. But as moms, it's super, or parents, or, however you identify, it's really helpful for when you are pushing a stroller.
Mm-hmm.
And people have thought that it's for bicycles and it's for strollers, but really the whole time it was for people with wheelchairs.
Yeah.
And I had no idea.
Yeah.
And it's things like that. Or when you can push the button at, we'll say the mall or doctor's office, the handicap accessible button.
The zoo just I play a game now where I spot the inclusion. This was from a previous guest that talked about doing that. We have a local zoo, and I went the other day, and this particular exhibit it has double door entry, and it's really hard to get a stroller wagon, a stroller, anything, because while you're trying to hold the door open and trying to push, and there's 2 sets of it because it's an air conditioned area.
Mm-hmm.
They finally got a handicap accessible button. And I was all too happy about that. Not because any of my family or I happen to have a physical disability, but because of how convenient that made accessing that space to anyone who is a parent with multiple children, let alone if you needed it just in your regular daily life.
Mm-hmm.
It was amazing.
It is
Amen.
amazing.
Good on you, Seneca Park Zoo. I will be visiting the sea lion and polar bear exhibit all the time.
Awesome. And what Elena was just describing actually has a name. It's called the curb cut effect. And that basically those are called curb cuts, I believe, and I wish I knew the history a little better. But I think there were like disability justice advocates, and it might have been in the 60s, who advocated for those to be put into the sidewalks. And for specifically, as you said, for people using wheelchairs. And then we realized, everyone from people using bicycles to people, pushing strollers or, carrying packages, like, it's really helpful for everyone. So yeah, a lot of times that term curb cut effect gets used for other things like captions and subtitles or other things that people just use that were really developed for people with disabilities.
That's so cool.
I didn't know that. I can't wait to post about that. That's amazing.
Just learned that.
Yes. Thank you, Carolyn. We love this.
Wonderful.
So you spoke about sensory overwhelm and challenges with coordination. How have you learned to navigate those experiences in your personal and professional life?
Well, for sensory overwhelm, and I've noticed this now more pronouncedly, I feel like it's as things reopen during the pandemic, I feel like everything, like every public place is much louder. Like, I don't know. So it was hard on my ears and hard on my concentration. And it's the sort of thing where, I just sort of get irritable, but you don't really know why. And it's because like all of the noise is it's just too much complicated, loud noise. So I went and got some earplugs. Actually, they're loop earplugs. I saw them advertised and like, it's great for, people who are autistic or people who just, have sensory sensitivities with their hearing. And I don't wear them often, but if I'm going to a restaurant or another loud place, I will put them in and it helps. It definitely helps. It's still loud, but at least I can better understand the person I'm talking to who's like right in front of me. I can hear them better and it's less overwhelming in terms of sound. So that was probably the main concrete action that I took in terms of sensory sensitivities and things like that. In addition to, and I think a lot of late diagnosed autistic people go through, where you wind up buying like a whole bunch of the fidget toys and, fidget items and just see which ones work better. Cause, and again, that's probably another thing that was developed for people who, needed to, stim with different items. And then like everybody wound up using them because everybody stims to a certain degree. So helps release energy. So, that's sort of the sensory sensitivity piece of it. The coordination piece is a little bit sort of a longer story, because I was always, I did very well in school academically, but anything that was like physical education or gym class or anything resembling a sport, particularly a team sport, I was terrible at. And I don't know how things are now, but growing up, I don't really think we were taught sports necessarily. You were just sort of like released into groups and sort of generally coached. And if you weren't good at it, like, it was just too bad. Like, well, you just have to keep
You're
doing
gonna get pegged in dodgeball.
Yeah, yes. Fortunately, we didn't play a whole lot of dodgeball, but we played plenty of other stuff, And I never really got good at any of that, which is tough because, kids need to move around and be active, and it's hard to not find something like that that helps you release a lot of your energy. So much later in life, I wound up discovering weight training, which is a solo activity, but also physical. And that's something that I do now. It's probably my main source of exercise is training with a trainer. And it's something like, this is something that I can do, like, because it's repetitive. It really forces you to focus on your body, like your position and your breathing and your grip and all of these things. So that just being able to focus so closely on those things without having to worry about, like, I'm going to get hit in the head with a ball or something, is really relieving. So I took pretty well to the weightlifting and the weight training. So that took years. I don't think I got there until like my 40s. So it was a long time, but it's possible. And it's hard just growing up and kind of feeling like, oh, I'll never be good at anything physical or sports like. And just like, no, but maybe you just haven't found the right thing yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gosh, there's so much that you packed in there.
Yeah.
Like, I love it.
I liked, to Elena's point, the grip. You talked about the posture, the formation, the repetitive nature of it, that there's like comfort in that. And I have to listen to the same 10 seconds of movies over and over and over. Like, my favorite that my son has picked up, Finding Dory. The character Dory has a short-term memory problem. And the very first statement that you walk into in this new movie is, "Hi, I'm Dory, and I suffer from short-term memory loss." And he rewinds that same 10 seconds over and over again, like he has short-term memory loss. It just that what would be an annoying earworm has turned into such a joyful moment. Like, I like when he stumbles on that. And then the cutting of the ice in the start of Frozen. I don't know what about that sensory experience he loves so much, but like everything you were describing, I think of I don't know. My son does not strike me as the type that's super hand-eye coordinated, but he does want to move around. And we found a lot of joy in swimming. And so he likes to spin in the water. He can now touch the bottom, so he's less compelled to actually kick and, use his scoops and all the things. But the joy that I see in the repetition in the pool, the repetition with like preferred items and comfort things, and that to me struck me the most, is that someone who learned later in life that they got their diagnosis later in life, but for me, there's comfort in routine and the level of repetition there. But even at a small level, like a micro level repetition, there's comfort in that. And it's nice to know for you that you found that thing for you. And I wouldn't have considered weight training, because in my mind, that is a really, like, Elena had talked about it earlier. I have to have a purpose. I'm either running towards something I really want or running away from something. Like running to run, just like lifting to lift. Like I'll lift a car to save my child maybe, but like that notion is not something that's super compelling for me. But I'm so grateful that you found it. And so where I do enjoy I don't like sports where the individual can be prioritized. Like, I like a team sport. So volleyball is really my jam, because one person can't do it all. You need at least two people. I understand that that's not for everybody. And so I really appreciate that what you found may not be for everyone, but it works for you. And you didn't give up looking for that, in search of that. And at any age, you can find something that you're passionate about. My mother-in-law is a very talented quilter. And
Yes.
she wasn't able to pick that up until her kids were old enough where she had some extra time to give. And so that really like gave me some strength and some purpose to know, okay, it's okay that I don't really have a passion right now. I don't have time to invest a lot of alternate energy. This podcast is where my outlet is. But like, I'll get back there. When when I was single, I had lots of interests, and now I binge watching my favorite show. Like that repetition is comfort for me. I love Ted Lasso. I love The Office. Do you have a favorite show, Carolyn?
Gosh, I'm really big into game shows, and in some ways a
Oh,
lot of it
cool.
is the repetition in some ways of the, because it has a very consistent structure and it's the
Right.
same hosts and a lot of the same structure. So I watch I was off from work this morning. So this morning I watched Let's Make a Deal and Price is Right,
Oh,
because that's
yeah.
on in the
Oh,
morning
Price
where
is
I
Right.
live.
Oh, I love
So
the
yeah,
Price is
but it's
Right.
great. Yeah, it's the same. And then after a while, you can like, okay, I understand how this game works. And like, this game is a game of chance. And this game is like, you can add some strategy here. And this is here. So yeah, but sometimes I
that.
just, it's a comfort show. So I enjoy that.
But yeah, I don't know. Elena, was that along the lines of where you were going?
Well, the fact that you go back to Carolyn, a lot of what I feel like the underlying piece is finding what works best for you and personalizing that. And I think you also talk again. Now, I know accessibility is different than the way I'm about to use the word access, but essentially giving people access, giving people opportunity to try different things. Like I remember, Marissa, I don't know if you remember your senior year, but my senior year of high school, they taught us how to weight train.
Oh, cool.
Do you remember
cool.
that when they got the weight room?
I do remember they got the weight room, but it was like cutting edge when I was graduating. So I don't think I got to take advantage in the same way you did. Unless you were an athlete that needed access to it. I don't
That's
think
true. But I think going back to what you said too, Carolyn, and you talked about singing, like, and you also talked about, like sensory output and sensory input. And I think that, like, if you're looking at learning, not education, because education is a box and learning is everything and it's everywhere and it's happening all the time. So if people had the opportunity to learn about all these different ways that they can get input and sensory input and sensory output, then it wouldn't just be this box of here's physical education. It would be like, I feel like physical education could be so much bigger. I feel like it could be more sensory based and be like, hey, look, this is how the body works. Like, why are we not coming at it from that kind of point of view? You know what I mean? If we're talking about health, why is it not mind, body, spirit, soul? Like, why is it not all encompassing? And I never thought of it like that until this conversation with you. So thank you for that, because I think that could be really transformative for educational institutions.
But since you have clearly offered us some really heavy hitting pieces where we can learn, I'm curious, is there a conversation from your years of learning from other neurodivergent people that either challenged or changed the way you think about neurodiversity?
Yeah, and this is one that will probably always stay with me. So soon after I shifted the focus of my podcast to neurodiversity, I knew I wanted to be, as inclusive of people's different experiences and backgrounds as I possibly could be. So if you're scrolling social media, you'll probably see a lot of, as they say, a lot of late diagnosed or low support needs autistic people who are talking because they're on camera and they're doing the whole content creation thing like all the other content creators. But there are plenty of other people who are, one, not on social media all the time, and two, have higher support needs. So I really wanted to make sure that I was representing and talking with people from those backgrounds too. So I always think about the first non-speaking autistic guest that I had on the show. His name is Noah Seaback. He has more of a social media presence now, but he at that point only had like a website at the time that I found him. But his name was known in the sort of non-speaking autistic advocate community because he has a business where he helps through Zoom or virtual, any kind of virtual interaction, kind of helps other non-speaking children and adults and their communication partners or parents or whoever, just kind of have like a peer-to-peer coaching type of situation. So I knew I wanted to talk to more non-speaking autistic guests on my show, because again, that's an experience that, because growing up, at least for me, stories about disability were always told by other people, like caretakers or medical or healthcare experts, or I never really got to hear from people who had those experiences themselves. So I really wanted to hear from someone to talk candidly about they went through. So Noah basically didn't have any means of reliable communication until he was about maybe 16 years old, where he discovered, letterboard. And he and his parents had tried other methods of communication. His parents were absolutely his very strong advocates, and continue to be as well. So he talked about on the show what it was like for him to not be able to communicate. And unfortunately, a lot of times when kids haven't found the method of communication that works best for them, teachers and other people just kind of treat them like they're not there, or they're just, like not even people sometimes. Like, it's actually pretty awful to think about it. So, and I would imagine as a person, it's hard to kind of deal with that trauma of, especially if you don't discover it until like much later in life. And then it's like, oh yeah, I've been listening to I understood everything that everyone around me has said the whole time. And so so talking about those stories and just hearing, what it was like for him to finally get communication, and like what a miracle basically it was for him. And now he's out like helping other people who are in similar situations, and talking out about, other issues that impact the non-speaking autistic community. That really opened my mind, because I had no awareness of any of these issues, because I didn't know anyone who was non-speaking. So it was really pretty amazing. So that really meant a lot to me, and I'll always think about that episode.
That's inspirational.
That's incredible.
And aspirational. Wow.
Yeah.
Because the fact that I know before we started recording, we had a really lovely chat.
Mhm.
And one of the things that really speaks to me, now my son is young, so it's possible that he may speak later down the line, but that I have a loved one that is non-speaking, and I am the advocate for this individual, is there's some pressure to because I can see that he understands. And one of our guests, who you may know because they are also on Neurodivergent, Sienna Speaks, talks about how they have low support needs in some areas and high support needs in other areas. And I think that's true of my son. But for me, when he is unable to properly convey, not because of, like, he knows he's upset or something's wrong, but he doesn't have the means to convey what is wrong exactly, I can see the frustration. They're high sensory needs, just lots of dysregulation, frustration. He doesn't currently have a behavioral plan, but we get high behaviors. And I can tell something's wrong, and I think it feels so crippling to know that there's something off and not have a means to express it. And so I really appreciate what you said, because I feel fortunate that my son is experiencing a level of acknowledgement, awareness, acceptance, inclusion that not everyone, including yourself, has had the opportunity to go through, because he's in a specialized classroom currently. Actually, today was his last day of preschool. And then he will be next year in our school district. And I feel grateful, because it was a concern for me. Like, what does school look like for him? Is he being left behind because he cannot convey his own needs and isn't a self-advocate yet? And it hurts me to know that there are people who experience that and get shut down just because, and given your beyond 6 seconds, right? If you took a look or paid attention beyond that first impression, there's a lot behind that initial curtain. And I am really grateful. I'm very blessed to be a mom to my son. And I'm glad, whatever the circumstances may be, however people choose to choose it, if I was gifted this child, if this child was if I was just prescribed to be his mom or ascribed to be his mom, but whatever the circumstances, I see the world a lot more beautifully and brightly and differently because of that situation. And I am glad that he doesn't have to start from ground zero. Like, I know that there are so many people that had to, and I just want them to know how grateful I am that if they hadn't said something, done something, spoken up, spoken out, and not just them, allies of them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I hope to be. And that's what I hope, like, what your podcast is doing, and what I hope our podcast will be doing is be allies and advocates for those folks, because I am privileged to not have to deal with all of those things, and there's a long way to go still.
Yeah.
So thank you for being among the first that I've seen to highlight that specific category of the non-speaking individuals that make up a large portion of the neurodivergent community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know that the power of people telling their own individual stories is, I really think that's one of the things that changes people's minds and hearts for real. So, yeah, I feel very lucky and fortunate to, for my guest to have enough trust in me as an interviewer to be able to share that story appropriately and authentically. So, yeah, it's definitely changed me too.
Yeah, that's true. What stories about neurodivergent people do you think need more visibility? And how can storytelling reshape public understanding? We kind of just talked about it a little bit, but are there particular stories? I think non-speaking is a huge area where people need more access, and people need to hear more and see more. And I feel like on Threads in particular right now, people are talking about how autism is not accurately portrayed in media very well, or there's a lot of nuance that's missing and it's not accurate. So what stories do you think should be told?
Gosh. I mean, in terms of sharing stories about neurodivergence, I feel like when, at least from what I've observed on social media, when people talk about neurodiversity or neurodivergence, a lot of times they're really just referring to people who are autistic, or sometimes people who have ADHD. And that's sort of as far as it goes. And then again, it's only like certain portions of the population that have, ADHD or are autistic. And I really, as part of my guest outreach and the people I want to have on my show, I just want to give a much broader sense of those stories. So, because I'm sure there are people out there who think that neurodivergent or neurodiversity is a more polite way to say autistic. And it's like, no, they're not even like,
right.
I mean, they're related, but it's like that's not
synonyms.
Exactly how that works. Yeah, that's the view. But it's, neurodivergence is a much wider kind of collection or descriptor. So I really want to, help share stories about people who, maybe have who have intellectual disabilities. I've had a couple of guests who have Down syndrome talk about their lives. And again, that's another population of people who, at least growing up, I don't think I ever had a conversation with someone who had Down syndrome until I started my podcast. And then I had, the great experience of having several. And it was always, their experiences were always shared by parents or caregivers or experts or others. So it's really great to be able to hear directly from people who a lot of times, maybe less now than before, but when I was growing up, we're clearly talked over by other groups. Just that was how it was. But now we know better. So those sort of, that's part of neurodiversity or neurodivergence, and then other conditions that tend to be more stigmatized, like things like schizophrenia, or people who experience psychosis, or people who have different types of like personality disorders, like things that people still, even allies, still kind of use as insults. Like that's still your community. Like that's still the neurodivergent community, are people who have things that tend to be more stigmatized, people who have dissociative identity disorder, who have like, plural states, or like that's a whole area that I've learned so much about from talking to people. And with the internet, there's like so many communities of people who have that lived experience and really talk about what that's like. So I like to bring those stories up as well, because I feel like depictions of autism are getting better in media. Part of that is because there's just more of them. Like when I was growing up, it was like Rain Man and that's it. So of course it's going to be terrible, because like it's one representation. So there's no way you're even going to get close to representing everyone. And then, we can go back and argue whether that was good rep or not. I don't know. But so now we just have more examples. But things like schizophrenia, a lot of times in movies, or dissociative identity disorder, like they're always the villains. They're always like dangerous people. And
Right.
and statistically, that's absolutely not true. They're actually much more likely to be victims of violence than to ever perpetrate any kind of violence against others as well.
I'm so glad you're calling that out.
Yeah.
But it's also interesting though, Carolyn, because I feel like right now on social media, people are also saying just because somebody is neurodivergent doesn't mean that they're safe either. I don't know if you've seen that trend recently, but that's also been a trend where it's like, I find it, first off, I don't like the word neurotypical. I think that it pits people against each other. And I think by saying neurotypical, it has this space of being, I don't know, negative, because people have taken it and weaponized it to mean better than, when really it's just neurotypical. I think if you're thinking about it in a non-threatening way, it just means more towards societal generic
or
state.
Norms.
Yeah. Like,
yeah.
And but I don't like that word. But being a neurotypical person, maybe not. I think I might have ADHD, but I digress. Going online and reading all about the neurodivergent community from neurodivergent content creators, and then hearing from people who are allies, and going back and forth on these topics, it's really hard to navigate. It's really hard to be like, oh, okay, so Marissa, you read off that statistic earlier about assault, and you're reading that statistic, but then there are people who are neurodivergent who have said that crime has been perpetrated against them by neurodivergent people. And there's this complex, this nuance that's like, okay, here we are. Every brain is different. Every brain is unique. Every brain is worthy. Every person is worthy. Every experience is worth telling the story. And here we are going back to the basics again of, if every person is unique, every experience is unique, and everyone is human. So we're all fallible. We will all make mistakes. We will all learn. We will all grow. We will all make, like, not intentionally cause harm, but some people do. But I find it so challenging sometimes to be like, okay, where does the allyship take place in this? Do I defend the person who it was perpetrated against? Do I say, like, not all neurodivergent people are like this? Do I say the statistic? And then I just go, I'm going to stay out of it. And I feel like at that point, then all of a sudden I'm not being an ally for anyone, and I feel like I've abandoned the community. Can you kind of guide us a little bit about how to navigate those kinds of more challenging situations?
Yeah. I mean, the challenge with discussions on the internet is that there's generally not a lot of room for nuance. Like, it's a lot of general statements, and that's really what you need in these types of discussions. So, a lot of times the society's traditional view of, disabled people, neurodivergent people is, it tends to go from one extreme to the other.
And I think that's another piece too, where like Marissa was talking about Sienna McAllister earlier, Sienna Stims. And when they talk to us, it's go to the source, go directly to the people and say, okay, why do you feel that way? Why do you think this way? And I think that has been really helpful. But again, going back to, like you said, there's not a lot of nuance and not a lot of room for it online. How do you choose when to be an ally or when not to?
Gosh. I mean, Again, it's tough when when you're watching conversations with people who you may or may not know. And I watch, a lot of times I'll discover these threads like after the fact, like people kind of arguing back and forth about somebody says something, and then it's like, oh, but this and what about that, and that's it's complicated. Like, people are complicated, and people also have other experiences and parts of their identity that influence who they are.
Right.
So it's, from an ally perspective, it's it's hard, because as an ally, would I want to like interject and then try to like explain something for the person who's being misunderstood? But then is that like, that maybe is not like the best. It's a nice impulse, but at the same time, am I just like sort of assuming something about their experience as well that they really should be sharing? So
Right.
it's hard to get sort of engaged in those types of conversations. But I guess the answer is like, any sort of pithy comment about anything regarding autism or ADHD or anything is probably wrong, because here's an example that I run across a lot, is that a lot of people, including autistic people, will say that, oh, autistic people have like a strong sense of justice. And that is like, okay, well, that seems like a little like you're superior to everyone else, but it's like, what is that really? But the problem is you have plenty of autistic people who are, have beliefs that are racist, sexist, like homophobic. Like, so where does that go in with the sense of justice? So what it really is more like a lot of autistic people tend to have black and white thinking, and that's where you're getting the justice from. It's like, you've decided like what's right in terms of your mind as the person, and you're kind of projecting that. So I think it's just sort of in a way, it's realizing that it's complicated, and there's just so many things that are intersecting, and so many different parts of your identity really impact what you're facing. Like your comment earlier about like, well, autistic people often are misunderstood, but at the same time, people might say, oh, but that doesn't mean that they're safe. And it's like, well, yeah, because they're people, and a lot of people aren't safe. Like, some people are just abusive, or for whatever, a myriad of reasons. It really, we don't want to start using our neurodivergence or autism as an excuse for our behavior, because that happens too, and that's not right as well. And some people will jump right on top of that and be like, yeah, that's well, you can't hold this person accountable because they're autistic. Like, we've seen that in the media, like with high-ranking people who come out and say, well, I'm autistic, that's why I harassed all those women. It's like, no, that's not why.
Elon Musk, it's okay.
Yeah. Or there was someone like in the UK on like one of the cooking shows that I don't watch, is over there, but like one of the people came out, and like the older men, and said, well, I just discovered I'm autistic, and that's why I was like so terrible to like all these women on the show. It's like, no, that's not why. I think you're just not a nice person, and you have other issues that have nothing to do with the autism. So I think it's realizing that. I don't know. That's not a great answer. I would struggle with that, honestly, because again, every time I do a show, I learn more things, like, oh, I didn't realize that these issues also intersect and impact people's experiences, or, oh, I didn't realize that this was part of what people are experiencing in their lives.
Right.
I really appreciated what you said about, and you talked about it earlier when you had selected your guests for your podcast, but going back to your comment about interjecting and not misinterpreting the original poster's thought or talking for them or over them, right? Can you tell me, in your opinion, why is it so important to listen to the lived experience of neurodivergent people themselves, like them telling their own story? Why is that important as opposed to someone else doing it for them?
Yeah, that's a great question. Probably the simplest way I could explain it from what I've observed is that, if you're someone who's an observer, you can only talk about what you're observing. So if, say, you work with an autistic child, you could talk about their behaviors. You could talk about, oh my God, they might have meltdowns, or they get really upset over these things, but you have no idea what they're feeling. You have no idea what their experience is unless they tell you. And a lot of kids, no matter, autistic, not autistic, can't tell you. Like, they just don't have that ability to verbalize in the language yet for that until they get much older. So, that's why I think it's important to hear directly from people, because they will tell you exactly what they're feeling and why. Like, a lot of people think, oh, if they're running out of the room, it's their, they need to be like disciplined because they're misbehaving. It's like, no, maybe there's something in the room that's really distressing, like noise or lights or
noise.
everything. Yeah. But like, if you're observing, you may not figure that out. Or so that's why it's, and it's interesting to hear people, like I've talked to a lot of younger people who are maybe like in their early 20s. So they've recently gone through the whole schooling and college experience. So they talk about what it was like for them in school. And, they're like, and it's so hard. It's so hard to hear people who are clearly seem like, very like kind and good people, at least from initial conversation, talk about how people used to say that they were bad. Like, like you're just a bad kid. Like, it's so really horrible. To hear people reflect that. It's like, yeah, I was, it's like, I didn't try to be a bad kid. I didn't bully anyone. I was just really struggling and I didn't know like what was going on. So yeah, that's why it's important to hear like, all the impact of everything that you say to other people and everything that you observe and your assumptions about what people are going through may or may not be correct. And you only really know from hearing people share their own experiences.
Love that. Yeah. Thank you.
It's so true. I had a student my first year teaching with PDA and it wasn't diagnosed. And that student was a person of color and came from a single parent household and had several other siblings. And this was a public school that was in a poorer area. And that student would like throw a computer at the principal or like do something and was constantly called bad, horrible, etc. And one day I sat down with the student and talked to them about what was happening and just asked the question, like, what's going on? Like, what is your body telling you? All of these things. I'm like 20, 21 years old. And it's so interesting to hear directly from the person. I didn't know. I don't know. You told me no, or they told me no, and I wanted to do this thing, and my body was like not having it, essentially was the answer. This is from a fifth grader who was constantly told they were bad. I don't like being called bad. I don't like being told that I'm not a good person. Like, and you're figuring they're 10, 11 years old, and they've already been told this their entire academic career. Can you imagine what that's like? Like,
yeah, right.
And to not have anyone to sit down and talk to you about it. And then after the third incident was moved to a different school because the public school couldn't support her needs. Awful. It was just, it was awful. And to know that society continues to put people in boxes and to not sit down and try to understand, I think these younger generations are really starting to make more of a change because they're hearing stories from your podcast, from other people, where they're like, oh, this does not work. We know this doesn't work, and it's okay that it doesn't work. We need to make sure that we are understanding people and understanding their needs. And I honestly, certain conversations, I think, transform and inform. And I'm really inspired by the people's stories that you've shared today. And I think even looking back to that one situation, I didn't even realize how much it influences my parenting. But when my children get dysregulated and throw something, I'll ask them what's going on. Like, what is their body telling them? And they're 3 years old. So again, going back to the language and having it, they don't really, but they can say now, I'm frustrated, I'm mad, I'm sad. And I think that learning from any human being is an incredibly emotional experience and life-giving experience if you go in with intent. And I feel like the more we hear from people, the more we learn about people, the better we'll become as people.
Yeah, for sure. And just because you brought it up in your story, I want to say, as I was talking earlier about how different parts of your identity also influence your experience, you mentioned that your student was a person of color. And unfortunately, specifically Black children will often not, there's a reason that autism tends to be thought of as like young white boys, because that's where it was, that's
the research is.
That's the research, and that's who was getting diagnosed more. But again, it really is across all populations. And a lot of times people see a young Black child acting out and just assume that he's a bad kid, or
Right.
she is just a behavior problem, or they have, oppositional defiant disorder. They couldn't possibly be autistic or ADHD or anything like that. So
Right.
that influence plays in too. And it's just important to be aware of all these other, dynamics in society and biases that as a society we have systemically play into this as well.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly helpful for people to hear, especially with the start of the school year too. I think there are people who are parents and aides and people in classrooms and higher ed institutions where if they come across someone who is neurodivergent or disabled, I think hearing this piece of it to just say, sit down, have a conversation with this person. Like, you don't have to go to the parent. You can go directly to the person. Go directly to the person and say, what can I do so that learning is an enjoyable experience for you? And if they don't have the language to do it, then you do it in a way where they can communicate to you. And that's when you step in and you say, okay, maybe I need a parent. Maybe I need somebody else to communicate what their experiences have been like. But I think oftentimes too, people go around the person. And I hope that our listeners today are hearing from you, Carolyn. Go directly to the source. Go directly to the person to learn. And this is kind of just getting me thinking about, we ask all of our guests this question, but if you could change the world to make things more inclusive, what would you choose to do?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's a very big question. Again, I think it would just be to actively seek out and listen to voices of people who have experiences that are different than yours. So whether they're from, whether they live in other countries or just are, they're autistic and you're not, or, and a variety. So you don't want to just be listening to like one or two people, but, people, who are just different backgrounds, different ethnicities, different religions, like everything, just to just hear more about stories and understand more about experiences. I think it just helps give a broader understanding of the world in general. I don't know that it will necessarily immediately solve any huge problems, but it is helpful for me to sort of break out and challenge my own bias and assumptions about people and things and how the world works or how the world is supposed to work or whatever that may be. So I think that's why I focus on storytelling so much.
I love that. My favorite Walt Whitman quote that's also highlighted in Ted Lasso: be curious, not judgmental. And I think everything that you said, stay curious, be curious, learning from others, like, I'm so grateful that that's your approach, and we need more people like that. I think the political climate would be very different. That was an approach being used. Instead, we need people like the creators of South Park to really check our current administration. But that said, I think the other component to what you were saying, as far as you didn't focus on just what you like, the opposite of your own identities, right? It's not the antithesis. You could talk to people who also share your intersectionality and still learn something new from them, right? It doesn't just have to be opposite, right? It can be like you, but it's another person and that different, and you'll get different things because they'll have different experiences. So it has been a true delight. Thank you for everything you said. You left me with a lot of great takeaways, including maybe even going back and trying weight training again. So thanks for that.
Yeah, thank you. It was great having this conversation. Thank you so much for hosting me on your show.
Yeah, absolutely. We hope to definitely have you back again, Carolyn, because you are
Oh, yeah.
a wealth of knowledge. And I really think that your work invites all of us to lead with curiosity and compassion and care. And I just am so happy that we've gotten a chance to meet you. And I really look forward to continuing our conversations and learning from you. And thank you so much again for being here with us.
That's right. Thank you. Yeah, it was really great. Thanks so much.
All right, everybody, stay tuned for our next incredible guest on this season of Everything is Learning, and have a happy day. Bye.
Thank you. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Everything is Learning. If you loved this episode, share it, subscribe to hear more awesome content, and let's keep the conversation going. Stay curious and keep learning. We'll catch you next time.